Hello, welcome back and nice to see you again. So far we discussed the Commission's use of consultation, impact assessment and policy evaluation. They are intended to support policy formulation but are also geared towards improving the Commission's position in the European policy process. However, these tools seem to produce, in the way they are currently applied, limited empirical evidence on impact, at least from a social science perspective. How can we assess whether policies lead to the intended effects or produce unintended ones? In this lecture, we discuss policy experiments and how policymakers can learn from them. Can experimentation help? The term policy experiment refers to a rather broad set of programs initiated to find out whether a policy has the intended impact. Often, rather different terms are used. The Joint Research Centre of the European Commission speaks of counterfactual impact evaluation. Legal scholars prefer the term experimental legislation, which indicates temporary deviations from existing laws or regulations with the purpose to evaluate the effects and side effects of these rules. The design of such programs vary. They range from pilot studies in which a new policy measure is explored in a small population or city, to more advanced comparative studies with several experimental and control groups. In the wake of the Commission's communication on smart regulation, several Directorate Generals have started to explore the possibilities of experimentation. This has led to guidelines to policymakers, an interest in social policy experiments, and questions about whether the Commission can make more use of experiments in the field of agricultural policy. Despite their diversity in focus and methodology, all these efforts seem in search of sound empirical evidence that can be used to develop new policy. From a social science point of view, the term experiment also refers to specific designs. Often complex terms are used to indicate what kind of comparison is made and how policy subjects are assigned to a group. To put it simply, an experiment is a controlled program in which a new policy instrument, or treatment in more general terms, is administered to a group of policy subjects. We use the term policy subjects here to indicate all individuals, groups or organizations whose behavior we would like to change based on the policy goals. In order to make sure that our policy makes a difference, these subjects should be drawn at random from a population, for example, the group of welfare benefit recipients in case of employment policy. The experimental group is then exposed to the policy instrument, while this treatment is not given to the policy subjects in the control group. The participants in this group are ideally also based on random sampling. If we observe a difference in behavior between these two groups, it can be attributed to the instrument that has been used. This invariance is based on the random selection of a sufficiently large number of group members. Random selection and the large size allows us to control for all other possible factors. Experimentation not only shows the effects of policy, but also whether policy will be effective by clarifying the causal link between instruments and outcomes. The downside of this approach is that making a control group and allocating policy subjects randomly may not be feasible. Ethical but also political reasons may prevent giving policy subjects different treatments. Moreover, in case of regulation, which is universally applicable for the area in which a government has jurisdiction, forming randomized groups is not possible. In that case, quasi-experimental designs are a possibility. Let's have a look. These include, among others, comparisons of the same group over time, interrupted by a treatment. Another possibility is a comparison over time between an experimental and control group that has rather similar properties, but not selected based on random sampling. Despite higher feasibility, these designs tend to have more problems with validity, since we cannot fully exclude that factors other than the policy cause the observed differences. A third possibility is to look at the results of a policy between an experimental and control group without comparing these groups with the situation before the treatment. Nevertheless, having many member states and even more regions and localities would make the Union an ideal context for policy experiments. Some member states, like the Netherlands, Denmark, the UK and France, already use this tool to develop employment policy and stimulate innovation and economic growth. Also, other areas could benefit from this strong evidence-based approach. In the scientific literature, there is a discussion about which methods can be used to support policy learning. It becomes clear that methods beyond experimental designs can be used to understand why policies have impact. It's important that the design is able to determine causality between a policy and its outcome. In addition, it should also bring these outcomes into the context of a theory that provides understanding of how policy works. This understanding is important if a policy will be applied in a different setting. Still, there are many reasons why policymakers may not adopt experimentation to promote evidence-based policymaking. A first reason is urgency. Sometimes social problems need to be addressed immediately and do not allow for further research. If your house is on fire, you need to act instead of studying the best way to put out the fire. The second reason is adaptation cost, already mentioned when discussing the policy fit theory. Policymakers may not want to change existing policy since it requires too much effort. A third reason is power. Moving to more evidence-based policymaking means that politicians need to rely more on experts. This may shift the emphasis on policymaking away from these elected officials to others, with the risk that it makes policymaking more technocratic and less legitimate. Another risk is that political actors will use expertise to improve their position, which means that information is only used selectively. Experimentation illustrates the need for evidence to support policymaking. It helps to determine at small scale the intended but also unintended effects of policy. Maybe our ambition should be to know the unknown. It's up to politicians to use this information in balancing different interests.